walk with me, if you will, through this moment in history. Um, Pretend for a moment maybe that you're one of the disciples. And Jesus has been walking with us for 3 years. And here he starts talking about the fact that he's about to die. He's about to leave. And he's going to come back, but not soon. And it's confusing. You're wondering, where are you going? What's going on, right? And so Jesus gives instructions. We see in the book of Luke. The book of Luke, the writer tells us that Jesus gave them instructions here right before the Passover, this Jewish holiday, right before this awesome meal, to go ahead and reserve a room on the second floor, an upper room, where the disciples can have the Passover meal together. And so you enter this room with Jesus and the other disciples, and there's a table in the center, a pretty large table, and you don't sit down to eat, you lay down to eat like they often would, especially for long meals like the Passover. They would lay down or recline on their side with their head toward the table and everyone's feet off to the side. Close quarters. And you're sitting there with all the disciples. You've been together for a long time, and there's rich conversation going on. The book of Luke tells us that Jesus was hinting at the fact that he was about to be betrayed, and the disciples, you and the other disciples, begin to have a conversation about which of these 12 are going to be the one who's going to betray him. It's not me, you probably say, but you're wondering who it is, and no one fesses up to it. And then you begin to have a conversation, Luke says, about, well, I wouldn't do it because I'm too good for that. I'm one of the best disciples here. And then a conversation, an argument actually breaks out, Luke says. You can begin to debate with your fellow disciples, which of you is the best? Which of you is the most loyal disciple? Which of you is the most loved disciple? Which of you is the best reputation out of them all? You begin to have this argument about who is the greatest. And as you eat the meal, this conversation continues on, and you keep talking, and every few minutes someone else brings up another reason why it's maybe them and not you or not the others, right? And without you knowing, in the background, because you're so caught up in this conversation, Jesus, your teacher and your master, has slunk, away from the table. And he's not there anymore. But you don't notice because you're so caught up in this conversation and your thoughts about, man, am I this greatest one? Am I the betrayer? And in the background, Jesus begins to prepare for one of the most beautiful acts of love ever known. Because in this conversation about who is the greatest, all of us disciples, we forgot one very, very important thing about eating at this time. In ancient times, while we walk the roads, there are no Nikes, there are no Adidas, there are straight up leather sandals. And those sandals leave your feet tore up. There's no shea butter. Well, there probably is shea butter or something like that. But anyway, I would imagine these disciples maybe weren't the best at using, didn't have the best foot care, possibly. And so as you're sitting around this table, yes, you're having a great time, but there's this lingering, faint scent of foot stench in the background, mingling with the vegetables and whatever it might be, right? Just my imagination. That's not in the Bible. It's just my imagination, right? You all forgot a big part of a big dinner. Somebody has to wash the feet of those who are going to recline at the dinner so that as I'm eating and your feet come near me, I'm not repulsed. And I can actually digest and have a good time. But we all forgot. Why did we forget? Because we're so caught up in figuring out who's the best, who's not going to betray. We don't want to be the worst. We want to be the best, or at least close to it. Well, Jesus recognizes this. And he begins to take off his clothes. Well, first of all, he gets up. The master, the teacher, the one who should be served, he gets up. from the table when he shouldn't have to get up at all. He gets up. And then he takes off his outer garments, it says, which leaves him in only his undergarments. Now, to clarify, if you are in your undergarments, which is probably like a short tunic, like right here mid-thigh, if you're in your undergarments, you are considered naked. That is not unseemly. That would be like me running through here in my underwear. No one wants to see that. That's improper. That's not okay. You'd consider me basically naked. Not okay. Jesus strips down to his undergarments. We don't notice because we're caught up. But Jesus then begins to go over to the corner, and in the corner he grabs the basin and a pitcher of water, and he picks up the basin and picks up the pitcher of water and puts it at one of our feet. He pours the water in the basin, takes that towel, wraps it around his waist. Now, the only time anybody wraps a towel around their waist is if they're a servant in a house getting ready to do a servant's work. Master and teacher has wrapped a towel around his waist and is now at the back of our feet while we're all here having this argument and conversation. And one by one, he takes toes, feet, ankles, corns, all of it. And he begins to wash feet and dry them. Now, we find nobody says a thing. You and I don't say a thing. Surely we're shocked, though. There's no doubt we're shocked. Because this would be unthinkable that our teacher, the one we've been following for 3 years, would stoop so low to be a servant. This is not what people do. If you're a servant, you do servant things. But there's no way that a master of a house or somebody of such a stature would ever not only do it, would not even think of taking on the role of a servant and wash feet. How dare you, Peter eventually says when he gets to Peter. No one else said a thing, but Peter, we know the loudmouth. Peter says something. Peter speaks up. He's not afraid to speak for the group. He's probably looking around at our faces and saying, I'm just going to say what y'all want to say, all right? Jesus, are you washing my feet? In other words, how dare you do that? This is not. What are you doing? You don't get on your knees and do that. This is so beneath you. What are you doing? And for a moment, we might think Peter's humble. We might think Peter's okay. We might think Peter's got a good mindset. But in reality, here's what bothers Peter. It doesn't really bother Peter that Jesus is serving him, because if it did, we might see Peter say, well, how about I do it to you instead? But we don't see that. What's going on with Peter? Peter is humiliated because he's the one being served by the master. And Peter knows that if he's okay with this, if he allows it to happen, that it actually reflects poorly on him. There might be some humility in there, but somewhere in there also is he's uncomfortable with what it's saying about him. At least he spoke up. No, the rest of us did. Stay at the table with me for a few more minutes. And then Jesus begins to get in this discussion with him, and Peter says, "No, you will never wash my feet." And Jesus is very clear. Listen, you don't understand what I'm doing, but one day you will. One day you will. And in that comment, Jesus lets us know that there's something beyond just this moment. That means in this moment, what's being done here is a symbol of something to happen, because later on we're going to understand it. And what is this a symbol of? Jesus is in this little environment is displaying the same attitude that he's going to carry on for the next 24 to 36 hours. In that 24 to 36 hours, Jesus is going to do a trial after trial, 6 of them total. 4 to 5 of them are completely illegal. He's going to be spit on, beat, crown of thorns. He's going to be whipped to near an inch of his life. He's going to carry a beam down a road when he doesn't really have enough strength to do so. And then he's going to be nailed, hands and feet, to a cross. And then he's going to be hoisted up, and he's going to suffocate slowly. Why? Why is he going to do such a thing? Because he's become a servant. He's taken on the mindset, the heart of a servant. Does he deserve it? Absolutely not. Has he earned it? Absolutely not. But does he do it? Absolutely yes. Why? How can you? Because he says, he understands. In verse 1, we see the hour had come to leave this world. Jesus understood in the divine thread that God was weaving in history that this was the moment, his penultimate moment. This was the time where he was to do what he was sent to do. And what was he sent to do? Not to be just master, not to be just Lord, not to be just Savior, but also to be a servant. And in this moment, washing feet, Jesus is displaying this, and he says, you will understand it later. Peter says, no way. There's no way you're going to do this. It's kind of like a lot of us. There are so many reasons we might have had in the past to reject Jesus. For Peter, it's, I'm humiliated in this moment. But what is our excuse? What is our reason for saying no when Jesus is pouring out something in our lives? Is it that we don't feel we're worthy? Is it that we don't feel we deserve it? Is it that we just don't feel like listening to him? What is it? What is it? Peter's not alone in rejecting Jesus' great gifts for us. Jesus replies, listen, I have to do this. I have to wash you. If I don't wash you, you can't belong to me. And all of a sudden, Peter has a 180. Peter says, oh, wait, if it means I got to belong to, for this to happen, for me to belong to you, well, then wash everything. Give me it all, right? And what Peter's thinking about is this ritual that the Jews would do before they went to the temple, where they would bathe fully, and that would make them clean in order to belong in the temple. And what Jesus says, listen, I'm starting something new. You ain't got to do all that. You've been walking with me for 3 years. You believe. You claimed just a few months ago that I was the Lord and Savior. You declared that. You believe. You know me. So you're saved. You got this, right? But sometimes we got to still wash our feet. And sometimes you got to allow me to wash you. What does that mean for us? That means that as we go throughout this life, we can have full confidence. There's joy in this. We can have full confidence that we're saved. If we have proclaimed the name of Jesus, made him King and Lord over our lives, our tongue has confessed that he is Lord and Savior, we are saved. We're secure. But as we go throughout this world, we get a little dirt on our feet. I got some dirt on my feet last night, because I didn't love the way I should have loved. I didn't speak the way. We get some dirt on our feet from day to day. We don't do all that God has commanded us. We mess up. And we need to be washed. We got to allow Jesus to make us over, make us better. He's got to wash our feet, and we got to allow him to wash our feet. And Jesus says, unless you will let me do this, unless you got to let me do this. You don't need a full bath, you say, but we got to do this. Because if not, you won't belong to me. Jesus knew what Peter was really after. Look how he responded to him, with kindness, with love, with patience. And after this, it says in verse 12, that after washing their feet, he put on his robe and sat down. And then he asked this, do you understand what I've just done? Do you get it? That's the question. Do you get this? Like, I just did this whole thing. You're shocked. You're in awe. Do you get it? Stay with me at the table for a few more minutes. Stay with me. He's asking us, did you get what I've just done? I think the question is still valid today. Do you get what I've just done? And then he explains. He says, you call me teacher and Lord. Look with me at verse 13, will you please? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. But since I, your Lord and teacher, having washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. Look at this real quick. In verse 13, Jesus says, you call me teacher and Lord. The word teacher there is not rabbi. It's not the same. They're calling him just straight up teacher. That's your title. Your title as a teacher. And Lord, similar. You are our master. That word that is used there for master would be a word that would be used for Caesar or kings or high royalty. And so the disciples have clearly get who Jesus is, right? We get that. And they call him that. But watch what Jesus does in the next sentence. He says, and since I, your Lord and teacher, there are two differences Jesus makes here in his words. First of all, he says, your Lord and teacher. Or if we translate it really by the Greek, it would be the Lord and teacher. In the first sentence, he says, you call me teacher and Lord, like my titles. But Jesus reemphasizes by saying, I am the Lord and the teacher, the only one. Jesus shifts from role. You call me by my role, by my occupation, by who I am to you. I want you to see me as who I am, my identity. Jesus makes a little extra push there. But not only that, but notice he reorders it. He says, you call me teacher, and because I'm your teacher, then you have made me master. But Jesus switches it. He says, no, because I am your Lord, I'm your master first. I am king of the universe, creator. I am your savior and redeemer first. Because of that, now allow me to be your teacher. And then what does he say? How do we know this is what he's doing? Because he says, you ought to do what I just did for you. So what is Jesus doing here? Jesus is flipping upside down the entire concept of what it means to love and to be a leader. First of all, the disciples, you and I, as we sat at the table, we were arguing about who's the greatest. And Jesus says, wait a minute. If you really think you're great, if you're so awesome, if you're so good, then you ought to do what I just did. And what does that mean? You better leave that behind and stoop down and be a servant. It reminds me of what Paul writes to the Philippians in chapter 2. He says, you should have a mind like Jesus. And then he describes what that mind is. It says this, though he was God, Philippians 2 verse 6, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. A real translation, a more closely translation would say he emptied himself of his divine privileges. And he took a humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on the cross. So notice there are two big things Jesus did. He emptied himself and he humbled himself. This is key. To empty himself, that word means to cancel out, to void. In other words, he says, whatever title I've earned, whatever honor is due me, I reject it. I throw it down. I get rid of it. I will leave it. It just gone. I eject it. I'm emptying it out. And that's one thing. That's one thing. I don't have to be all those things. But Jesus goes one step further and he humbles himself. What does humble mean? Humble means to take on something lower than what you really are. So not only did Jesus empty himself, but he humbled himself. Now here's the thing. In our day and age, we say humble like empty. If we say he was a humble person or she was a humble person, what we're saying is they didn't act like what they could act like. They didn't take on their role and like lord it over us. For us, we get that. That part's not a problem. What we have trouble understanding is the actual humble part, the way that the Bible describes it here. We're fine and we're okay with emptying ourselves of titles, especially because it makes us look more nice and more agreeable, and we love that humble title's great, but are we able to humble? Are we willing to humble ourselves like Jesus humbled himself? Which means not only will I leave my title, but I'm willing to take on another title, and that title is the lowest title in our society. This would be like the President of the United States cleaning toilets in the White House. This would be like the CEO of your organization going around to everyone's house and offering to be their housekeeper for the remainder of their time here. I will take on something that's not becoming of my title. And why would I do that? Now, why in the world would I? No one in their right mind would do that. There are no advantages to this in society at all. None. You don't get anything for it. You're not looked at as better for that. The only reason this is of any benefit is if it's something for the kingdom. Jesus flips the whole thing upside down. And if that's not clear, the writer of Luke describes Jesus' talk here, and he says this in chapter 22, verse 25. Jesus says to them, in this world, the kings and great men lord that over the people. In other words, they say, I'm a king, and they walk around with pomp and circumstances and horses and chariots and all that stuff. Like leaders do this, and in our day and age, we know it. But leaders got jets, and leaders got private VIP offices, and you can't come in and talk to them. You can't come in and see them. You better not ask them any questions. You can't even, there's no open door. They can say there's an open door policy, but you better not walk in or ask a question. Like they lord it over. I'm in charge and you are not. Kings and great men lord this over the people, and yet they're still called friends. We love the CEOs, right? We yes, my CEO, we champion them, or my boss, they're called friends of the people, and yet they're really not friends. Jesus says, but among you it will be different. And then he speaks directly to their argument, to the argument we've been having at this table. He says this. He says, among you it'll be different. Those who are greatest should take the lowest rank. And the leader should be like a servant. And then he gets real here. He says, listen, who's more important? Talking about the culture. The one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, of course, right? According to culture, the one who sits, the one at the table, that's the one who's of more honor. But not here, Jesus says. Why? For I am among you as one who serves. A couple key things here, and I'll get out your way. Number one, we see love revealed here. We see love fully revealed here. Now, how do we know that? If we think about what Paul says in Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind, right? How does that apply? We see Jesus being patient with his disciples. They are arguing about all sorts of things, but he's patient with them. And instead of responding with a lecture, with a bashing, what does he do? He responds with kindness. He responds with service. He washes their feet. Love is not envious, right? Jesus doesn't envy their carefree nature. He's about to go to the cross. Jesus is about to go to the cross, face the greatest, most painful moment of his life, but he's not envious of the fact that they're carefree. He doesn't hold that against them. Love is not boastful or proud or rude. Jesus doesn't say, I'm king of the universe. You know who I am. You ought to be washing my feet. Jesus doesn't hold that against them. Love is not selfish. It's not agitated. It's not petty. Jesus doesn't say and list all the wrongs they've done in their life. He doesn't even list all the wrongs they've done in the 3 years with him. He doesn't even list all the wrongs they've done in that moment, in that night. He's not petty. Instead, he responds with service and says, I love you. Love is not glad when wrongdoing happens, but love is glad when there's truth and rejoices. Jesus doesn't support their idiocy. He doesn't support the fact that they're missing it, but he takes the opportunity to teach them, to show them the truth. Love overlooks wrongdoings just as Jesus does. Love believes that God is working something in all the circumstances. Love hopes that God will fulfill what he promised. Love endures even the worst trials. And in this moment, we see Jesus doing all of that. He overlooks the fact that they are gone. They are not getting it. He believes that God is still working something in these disciples, these raggedy disciples' lives. He hopes that God will bring it to completion, and he endures the fact that they're gone. They are not paying attention to him at all. They are disrespecting him completely, and he endures it all and kneels down, stoops down to wash their feet. And Paul says at the end of 1 Corinthians, this treatise on love, it says, love never dies. Which is ironic because Jesus just a few hours later dies. But we all know the story and the good news. That love never dies. 3 days later, Jesus is alive and well. And not only alive and well, but man, he holds the keys to all our future. And he has secured a life with him. Love never dies. Not only do we see love revealed here, but we also see that love is received. Jesus challenges Peter, you've got to receive this love. Listen, we have to receive Jesus' humiliation. It doesn't feel good or even seem to make sense that Jesus would serve us. And I would venture to say we really maybe don't really get it. I think sometimes I even struggle to really, really get it. That Jesus would humiliate himself to be a servant. That Jesus would walk in here and say, I'm going to clean up after all you guys afterwards. Hey, I'm going to run out and get you. Let me go get you your lunch. I'm going to stop by every one of your houses and get you what you need for this meal. I got you. It's taken care of. No worries. I got you. Oh, and you haven't cleaned your house in a couple weeks. I got you. I'm going to do that. Would any of us say, yes, Jesus, you can do that? No. In our right mind, we're not saying that in our right minds. If Jesus were to walk around, no, we would be a lot like Peter. Heck no. Jesus, you are not doing that. But Jesus demanded, unless you receive and accept my humiliation, I cannot give you what I'm here to give you. So love has to be received too. It's difficult for me to receive when people are really loving me. It's hard. I would rather be the servant than to be served. But Jesus sets out a pattern here that not only are we to serve, but we also need to learn how to receive that love as well. I need to shut up and allow you sometimes to get me water. Thank you, John and Carmen, every Sunday. I need to take that. I can get my own water. Ain't no problem. But I need to take that. You're showing love. I got to receive that. We got to receive that when someone walks up and says, let me pray for you. It's sometimes hard. Someone wants to take your family out to dinner. Sometimes that's hard. What are you saying? I can't afford it. No. We need to allow each other. We got to receive this love. Not only is love revealed and we see clearly what love looks like. Not only is love received, but we also see then that love waits. Love waits. What do I mean by love waits? Jesus says you won't see and really understand this till later. And so what does this mean? That means that sometimes Jesus is doing a thing that we won't see right now. He's working, he's showing us something, he's doing something in our lives right now. And he's pouring out whatever he's pouring out, and we got to wait. Love will endure and wait and hold on and hope and believe and endure and hope and believe and endure and wait for the moment that God fulfills exactly what he's got. Final note. The challenge, I think, for us rests down in John 17. Another challenge, I should say, rests with John 17. John 13, verse 17. I'm sorry, John 13, verse 17. And I'll close with this. John 13, verse 17. He says, now that you know these things, and a better translation would say, if you know these things. And that if is not like, I'm not sure you know it. It's kind of like, I know you know it, but like, if you take that on, like if you actually like accept that and roll with this, right? If you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. These things, what is these things? If you know that my example has been that you humble yourself and love each other the way I loved you. Well, where do we get that? Jesus gets distracted a little bit by what Judas is doing. We see that in verses 18 through 30. But go with me to verse 31, John 13, 31. As soon as Judas left the room, Jesus said, skip down to 34, I'm giving you a new commandment now. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. The new commandment, the word new there isn't like this is something we haven't seen before. That's not that. The word new there means like a fresh. I'm showing you a commandment in a way you haven't seen it before. I'm refreshing this commandment. Jesus, in case the disciples, in case you and I didn't get it, he says it very clearly here. John 13, 34. Now I give you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You love each other. And then he says this. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. I love this last verse. I love it. Here's why I love it. Because Jesus knows his disciples, man. He knows they're kind of like, he knows that, yeah, he's going to have this awesome talk and he's giving this great display of love. But he knows Peter's about to deny him. He knows they're all about to scatter. Like, he knows them. And so he's realistic. So what does he do with his last comment on this whole love thing? He speaks directly to the argument they were having before. Remember, they were arguing about what? Who was the greatest? And so how does he speak to that? He says, listen, he says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples, right? Why did they want to be the greatest? Because they wanted to be associated with Jesus. What they cared about was that at the end of the day, when they walked down a street, someone looked at them and said, hey, you belong to Jesus. That's what they really cared about. And so Jesus, after this whole discourse, after this whole lesson, comes right back to it, speaks to their very heart, and says, you want that? This is how you're going to get it. do what I just did, but do it for each other. Our challenge as a church, not just and here at KCC, but globally, not just globally, but here, is to love. Our world went through a pandemic of COVID-19, but in that pandemic, we saw an increase in a much greater pandemic. People are lonelier than ever before. Relationships are worse than ever before. People don't feel like they have a sense of purpose. What does it all come down to? They don't feel like they belong. Why don't they feel like they belong? Because love is missing. Now, here's the reality. Here's the biggest thing out of this. The world can come up with all sorts of descriptions and definitions of love. Love might look like a relationship with a significant other. Love might look like you getting accolades at your job. Love might look like you making more money. Love might look like people recognizing you in the community. Love might look like getting shout out on social media. Love might look like you getting more followers. Love might look like you belonging to a big church with all sorts of people. Love might look like people calling your name from a stage. Love, the world can come up with all of these beautiful ways to love. Love might look like a beautiful date night out. And it doesn't mean that those things aren't love. Those things are love. But here's what Jesus is clearly saying to us. All of that isn't real at the end of the day. Or at least it's not as real love. If we want real love, the type of love that's going to keep people from committing suicide, if we want real love, the type of love that's going to keep marriages together, if we want real love, the type of love that's going to keep communities together and keep people from different backgrounds together and keep churches from splitting and keep church people from talking bad about each other and keep church people from disconnecting with each other and keeping people from guilt, falling into depression and keep people from falling into substance abuse. If we want love, if we need love, and we do, if we're going to get that love, the only love that's going to satisfy that is this type of love right here. And who's going to give that love? You and me. Why? Because Jesus did his job. Jesus already did his. He showed his example and he went to the cross. Jesus, I done mine. And what is his command to you and to me? Now you love each other like I loved you. Wash each other's feet. And so the challenge for you and me is to look each other in the face every week, call each other up, whatever it might be. And even though we can't stand the way each other talk, even though we have trouble with the fact that you pick on me all the time, even though we have trouble with the fact that you love UM and I love UNC, I'm just kidding. All right, even though we have trouble liking each other, even though we got problems with each other, even though I'd rather not spend time with you, if I'm really honest. That's not me. I'm just, example, okay? Even though we got this whole list of reasons we might not, will we love each other? When I hear that you've gone through something difficult, will I pick up that phone? When I hear that you are having trouble with this person, will I offer to pray with you? When I find out that you don't have food in your house, will I open up my wallet and give it to you? Listen, I'm not good at this. I'm struggling with you. I'm trying to love better. I do not say this as if I've figured this out. I haven't. Well, this is it right here. There's nothing to figure out, but I'm trying to get better. But here's the deal. I love my church because we love each other. I see examples of this every week, from the birthdays that we share, to calling and visiting people when they're in the hospital, to making ways and calling people and checking on people. I don't do it as well as I should, but I'm learning to go. I love my church because we love each other, and even though we don't do it perfectly, we're trying to get better. And here's my ask. Can we all try to do that better? Not because I'm asking, but because Jesus commanded it. Let's love one another. Let's love one another. And that means nothing other than this. That when it comes time to meet your need, I need to see you greater than me. Jesus humbled himself to the status of a slave and washed feet. What's going to stop you and I from loving each other the way we should? I will see me as greater than you. That's the biggest challenge. As we talk, maybe it's the degree I hold. Maybe it's the way I speak. Maybe it's the neighborhood I'm from. Maybe it's the university I went to. Maybe it's the family I belong to in Miami. Maybe it's the job title I have. But some way in my head and in my heart, if I see you greater, if I see me greater than you, I can never love you the way Jesus loved you. I've got to empty myself. We have to empty ourselves of all these things that the world says mean something. It means nothing in Christ because it meant nothing to Christ. I got to leave it all behind. I got to leave it all behind. I got to leave it all. And that's hard. That's difficult. That's difficult to say that, yeah, I spent all these years studying, or I spent all these years on the job, but I'm going to kneel down and clean a toilet at KCC. Or I'm going to drive to Broward to go see you in the hospital. Yeah, no, that doesn't make sense, but that's exactly what Jesus says. It's not going to make sense. But that's how the world's going to know you're my disciple. And so if we want to call ourselves Christians, if we want to call ourselves those who belong to Christ, we have to love like he loved. And my ask again is, will you join me on a journey to get better at this? I can't do it. Jesus made it clear. You can't do it without me. He said to Peter, unless I wash you, you can't, I can't do, we can't do this. It's not going to come from here. I don't have that capacity. But because Jesus lives in me, because Jesus lives in you, he can make that love happen. Can we be a church? Will we be a church? I think that's one of the biggest questions we get. Ask, will we be a church that loves everyone who walks through this door? This message isn't for the world. Notice Jesus was talking. I'm almost done, I promise. This message wasn't for this world. This message was for his disciples. It was an intimate group, just those who were members of the group. This was not for everyone else. He doesn't command them to love others like he commands them to love your neighbor as yourself. He commands these guys to love as I loved you. So will we love each other? And when we do, watch this community come flooding through these doors because they're looking for a real love. Not a Mary J. Blige real love, a real. I had to, it was on our mind. Everyone was thinking it. I had to say it. I had to say it. Amen. A real love.